Tuesday Newsday hath returned, my friends. Immortal Empires, the long-awaited combined campaign for Warhammer 3, the content we've been building towards for, I don't know, the last 6 years or so, is coming in August. Let that sink in a bit. Lather your loins up with that new info. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Prevailing sentiment in our community has been a rather pessimistic outlook on this topic, I'd say. In fact, the most common bet I've seen was that IE wouldn't drop before September 31st, a date that doesn't even exist. So no matter how we slice it, it's dropping at least a month before many of us anticipated, which means campaign previews and battles could happen as early as July. In fact, we already know that the winners of the ongoing invitational qualifiers will get a working build around that time, so the cogs are in motion, as it were. Got a big blog from Creative Assembly today, and while it certainly wasn't bombshell, earth-shattering news, there are still some really interesting points worthy of discussion, because they're breaking down some of the new features and reworks coming with this update without getting into the nitty-gritty extreme specifics. For example, Bellicor is indeed confirmed to be launching alongside the combined campaign with his own unique start position, an updated skill tree, and presumably some new mechanics to boot, or at the very least, drawing from Demons of Chaos and or the Warriors of Chaos and what they're bringing to the table. Remember, prevailing opinion at the moment is that the Warriors of Chaos update will come alongside IE. Extending off that conversation we had last time, in an effort to better fill out the map and avoid dead zones with only AI, Gromradal the White Dwarf, Volkmar the Grim, and yes, Helman Gorst are splitting off into their own dedicated subfactions, which means unique start positions for them too. I know a lot of people commented about the White Dwarf's rivalry with Malekith and the Dark Elves in the last video, suggesting he could be moved to Nagaroth, and I do think that's a possibility, especially if Tretch is moved to his true home in Crookback Mountain. Gorst, I have no idea where to put. Yeet him into the sun for all I care, but I guess that's not how CA feels, because apparently he's getting a big rework too. And Volkmar, I'm not sure where to put either. I'll let you guys make the call on where you'd like to see him end up, but we have confirmation he'll get his own unique personal mechanics, which is true of some of the other older legendary lords as well. To that point, 29 legendary lords will have new start locations in Immortal Empires, and I don't believe CA is referring to moving these over like one region. They seem to be talking substantial changes, like Lokir from Lustria to Ind, that kind of stuff, moving halfway or all the way across the world, which I think is really exciting. Start positions are arguably the best way to make an old character feel fresh and new. Forget the revamped skill trees or shiny new mounts, those are important, but if you're in a different area of the world, you've got new areas to expand to, new enemies to fight, and a whole different outlook on how to approach things, and that completely changes up the game no matter which lord you are or where you're starting. I seriously doubt people are going to like all these changes. If 29 lords are moving, there will probably be at least a few you don't really appreciate. I think that's okay. There are going to be some of you who are purists and just want the Altdorf characters in Altdorf, the Dark Elf lords to start in their appropriate cities and so on, but there are a lot of lords that would simply be less fun to play and have a less unique campaign experience if they began their conquest from their rightful starting place in the lore. Sometimes I think it's good to get away from that, have them be out on crusade, and go somewhere else. I think that adds to the variety and replayability within each faction. I think that benefits some of these factions tremendously when you spread out their lords and give each area of the map a taste of what each faction has to offer. Which naturally isn't to say we should be ignoring lore completely here and plopping characters willy-nilly, but if there are 29 old characters getting moved, there will probably be at least a little bit of that, and in my opinion, that is alright. Either way, it'll be good to have some Game 1 and Game 2 representation in places like Cathay or the Southern Chaos Wastes. Which leads into my next point, and I can finally breathe a big sigh of relief here, because either CA listened intently when I made that video back in January about my concerns, or I guess great minds think alike. I'm not really sure. I do know they occasionally watch my videos, so maybe I'm the reason, maybe not. It doesn't matter, I'm just happy. Sea lanes are connecting the eastern and western edges of the map, allowing players to traverse the ocean using portals. How exactly those will work, bit short on details at the moment, but you can assume there will be at least a little bit of a convalescence time when you go into that portal, that you won't just teleport to the other side in the span of instantaneous. Which is seriously going to open up this campaign experience and add a massive amount of playstyles and avenues for expansion. You will no longer be confined as Cathay, or as Malekith and the Dark Elves, or as Kroq-Gar and the Last Defenders, to your little corner of the world, with only one way to leave. Because now Miao Ying will have to worry about Dark Elf invasions on her eastern border, and whoever occupies the Black Ocean in the southwestern edge of the map, well, now they have to worry about Chaos Fleet sailing up from the south or the Jade Fleet of Cathay appearing near their western coastline. There's a lot more dynamism that goes on here when you open up the map like that. Instead of having arbitrary borders that cut off what you're able to do, now you can expand anywhere, go anywhere, and that's exactly what the point of Immortal Empires should be from the word go. This also gets extremely close to confirming that the leaked map is essentially correct, because there will be accessible ocean west of the Isthmus of Lustria and the Sentinels of Zeti, and east of Cathay. And before, that was not guaranteed, that was not confirmed in any way, shape, or form. So ocean on both the eastern side and western edges of the map is very good news, and means we're probably looking at something extremely expansive here. So, we're going to be seeing more of the Far East than we did in Realms of Chaos, and that is really good news too, because now, stuff like Yin Yin the Sea Dragon, the Jade Fleet, the Eastern Empires of Cathay, the legendary lords that we don't have fleshed out yet, are much more likely. Basic crux of it is, you are now going to be able to interact with factions you would have never seen during the course of certain playthroughs, and that is huge. Now, one of the biggest problems with any 4X or strategy game is, of course, the snowball, where you become impossible to stop by the AI and the campaign becomes an auto-resolving slog, at which point most people stop playing and either move to a new campaign or drop the game entirely. The Chaos Invasion did its best to throw a wrench in that whole shtick, but one, it was lacking the flavor of God-specific units and demons when it first came out, and Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2 is just Chaos Undivided, which in my opinion is the worst Chaos. And 2, it gets old and tedious when it's the only endgame threat that ever appears. That is changing come IE. Creative Assembly is introducing dynamic, randomized mid and late game challenges like Greenskin Incursions or Armies of the Living Dead. Now, I think I'd prefer if these scenarios felt a bit more organic, and that if Manfred or Vlad, for example, are creating a large empire as the AI, then it would be more likely that an undead resurgence begins blighting other kingdoms further afield. And frankly, I'd be surprised if that's how it works. I kind of doubt it, but I do think it's important for these features to be customizable, allowing players to turn on, turn off, or ratchet up the difficulty to their own requirements, just like they can now with the Chaos Invasion. So if you want to make it hellacious, go for it. Turn that dial up to 11. If you don't want any of these randomized incursions to happen at all, just press off and then it never happens. You don't have to worry about it. Or even pick a specific endgame event yourself as the player. So if I want a demonic threat in my endgame, I can just select demons, or I can just select undead or greenskins. If I want Black Ark Bonanza, I get to choose that. And if I want it randomized, that's how it goes down too. But the most important element of this new feature is that I don't want it to feel cheap, like early Rome 2 Civil War, before Emperor Edition had its rework. That felt cheap to me. Having 8 stacks just appear out of nowhere at your capital with 0 warning, splintering your empire, is just not very fun. So, options and customizability are great, but the core features need to be logical, well-designed, and hinted at so you can take steps to prepare for them. The cool thing about this, though, is that it could very easily be setting the stage for someone like Nagash, because we've talked about this in the past, how a unification of the vampires under Bone Daddy and the Great Ritual of the Dead could be an alternative endgame threat to Archaon and his end times. This feature could provide a great blueprint for modders and for future DLC, so it has the potential to be a big one, even if when it's first implemented, it isn't perfect or even great. We'll see. There's some info about revamped victory conditions too, making them less arbitrary and more satisfying based on whichever faction you're playing, so you don't need to like conquer Khemri as Tyrion, who doesn't give 2 shits about the Tomb Kings. Kind of vague here, but hopefully more closely tied to each lord's backstory and what they would want to accomplish from a narrative standpoint. Nakari, eradicating Atane and the Order of Lore Masters, for instance, that kind of thing, tie it into the lore, have Kemmler hunt down Ark in the Black to avenge his end time shenanigans, what have you. And multiplayer campaigns are taking a page out of Fat Shark's book, so if you're playing with friends now, only the host needs to own all 3 games. You'll still be limited to whichever lords and DLC you own, obviously, but you can only own Warhammer 3 and still play the combined campaign with your homies, which seems a reasonable compromise. It's one, a good way to get people to play multiplayer campaigns, which have so much promise in this series, but even I haven't gotten around to it. It was something I was actually very hyped about. And obviously, I like the idea of making Immortal Empires free for everybody at some point, but I won't pretend to know if that makes any sense from a financial perspective. It's very easy to sit at home and say, yo, just give it to us for free. You'll get way more players that way. And that's probably true, but if those same players then don't turn around and buy anything else, then they're not very useful customers from a business perspective. So on that point, love the idea on paper of everybody getting it, but I might see why a company would be reticent to engage with it. Don't know that that's their perspective yet, but I have a feeling that kind of is. Considering this is what we've been building towards for half a decade, they probably want to make some fat stacks off the idea, and the best way to do so is to encourage some Game 1 and Game 2 sales. Then there's a whole spiel about why this is being called a beta and their approach to it. It's basically what I communicated previously. They're aiming to be feature and content complete for all Game 1, Game 2, and Game 3 lords that have released thus far, in i.e., you'll have the full world and the sandbox mode and all those elements you want in a functional, content-filled, and fun state. That's what they're aiming for. But there will certainly be bugs and balance issues. There will certainly be changes that not everybody agrees with, or even basic things like economy, or trading, or confederating for a faction like the High Elves. Those will likely be different in Warhammer 3 due to that transition from Game 2 to Game 3. So they're going to take all that feedback on board, iterate, and quickly try to implement changes and improvements based on y'all's experiences and negative and positive feedback. And that is going to be the important thing. I trust that you guys will let CA know if you don't like something, but if you like it, if you don't like it, make sure you go to the forums, make sure you go to Reddit, make sure you go to YouTube comment sections, and CA will be paying attention. This is how we've gotten the game just insanely improved from what it was all the way back on day one for Game 1, and just, like, even minor things when you think about it. I mean, start positions. When we first started this trilogy, like, they didn't realize people want different ones. They didn't realize people wanted that unique variety. They wanted more unique skill trees. They played it very safe for Warhammer 1. The criticism, the feedback over the years is the reason why this series is as amazing as it is right now. So make sure you give that to them. Constructively. Nicely. Because if you're just calling them dickheads, you're obviously not going to get... They're going to tune you out. Like, no one gives a shit what you're saying if you're being an asshole about it. Overall, it's good to hear that a lot more work is being put into this than just a simple transition or port from Game 2 to Game 3. I think that was a fair criticism or concern that a lot of people might have had, and I think most of us can agree if they took all this time and made no changes or improvements in terms of skill trees, start positions, faction mechanics, what have you, I think a lot of people would have been upset, and in this case, rightfully so. Still remains to be seen what the launch state of Immortal Empires will be, but even if it is buggy, as long as it's fresh and fun and stable, I think it will reinvigorate a lot of people's interest in this game, as evidenced by the fact that my last Immortal Empires video has 215,000 views. Many of us took a hiatus and temporarily lost interest after a few campaigns in Realms of Chaos, but people evidently still care about the series. They want it to do well, and having all their favorite races back in custom battle, multiplayer, and a combined campaign will do wonders for the game. But it is still essential that CA does everything in their power to make this experience a banger straight from day one, beta or not. They really cannot afford to have this be a flaccid, disappointing wiener come August. So, we'll see. I like what I'm hearing. I'm sure there will be quite a few more reveals between now and release day, including the official unveiling of the map itself. But stay tuned, and I'll keep you guys informed and ideally entertained during this wait. See you all when I get back from San Diego. Stay classy.